Sona Jepsen is an Indian-born executive coach, former Fortune 100 sales leader, and author of Pink Dragon, a deeply empowering book about reclaiming identity, purpose, and voice. Please welcome Sona Jepsen.
Hi, Lisa. It's great to be here. Thanks for the opportunity.
Wonderful. Sana, most women watching us globally, they are immigrants who have moved from another country for a better education or a career boost. Some are still willing, but lacking the courage. So, would you please start by inspiring them a little and telling them about what was planned to you as a young woman?
I grew up in India in a very traditional Sikh family, an incredible family. But I was well aware that I was going to have an arranged marriage. And I decided very quickly that this was not the person I wanted to marry because I had different aspirations for my life. And so at 19, I'm one of 32 cousins, and I'm the only one who has not had an arranged marriage, just to give everyone a sense of the scope and the impact of my decision. I decided I didn't want to have an arranged marriage. I decided to apply to graduate schools in California. I got a $10,000 bank loan that my best friend's father co-signed. I had $240 in my pocket, and I arrived in Los Angeles with one suitcase. And that was really the start of my journey of becoming.
Fantastic. Becoming the pink dragon, which you're going to explain later. Awesome. So, about your fantastic book, Pink Dragon, this is such a bold, unforgettable title. Would you tell our audience what it means and why did you embrace this title?
Yes, I'd love that. So Pink Dragon is, interestingly enough, a name that was given to me by women I have coached and I had worked with over the years. And when I was in a very difficult personal situation earlier this year, I had women reaching out, offering words of support. And many of them called me the Pink Dragon. And that was really the acknowledgement that I was acting a certain way, leading a certain way, performing a certain way that was resonating with professionals. Who or what is a pink dragon? Very simply, I'd say a pink dragon is someone who lives and leads with softness and fire, right? And I think what's really important to remember, it's this balance and it's this perfect harmony of compassion and courage. And it really, Pink Dragon teaches you really how to reclaim your fire and live the life. And I often say, it's not the life you intend to live, but it's really remembering the life you were meant to live.
Oh, so great, so great. You were born in India and you came to the United States very young. So a lot of people will also relate to that experience. What would you say that your immigrant experience helped shape in terms of identity, how it influenced themes like belonging, self-invention, and even your personal voice?
Love that question. I will say that immigrants to me are professional reinventors. I think immigrants really understand on a very cellular level what it is like to lose your language, lose your identity, to start all over, lose status, right, and build from zero. As a pink dragon, that's the journey I honor and I respect. What I have learned as an immigrant and what I share with others is your roots are not your chains. And that's a really important distinction. I think being an immigrant for a while when I got to United States, I would say discarded and ignored everything that even made me Indian. And then I began to realize that when I was successful, it was because of things that I had learned in my upbringing. It was ways of interacting with people that I had actually learned growing up in India, in the family, in the religion I grew up in the community I grew up in. And that's when I realized that having that diversity of experience wasn't just a nice to have, but it was actually a strategic business move. And I wholeheartedly decided to lean into it. And so I will say diversity to me isn't decorative, it's really strategic.
Fantastic point. We always discuss here also the question of language. Some people have the illusion that if they don't teach their mother tongue to their children, the children will learn English better. I
Right.
think it's a disservice, and many professionals that came here agreed because if you speak two, three languages, you just start ahead. You can work, worst case scenario, in the United Nations or someplace as an
Yes.
interpreter or doing something else. What's your opinion about this part of language overall? You think it's something to teach children who are born in the United States?
Great. So I used to speak, I should say, 5 languages, because that's what you do when you grow up in other countries. And I think there was a richness in experience, right? That came from, and so some of my fondest memories are actually speaking with my grandparents in my mother tongue of Punjabi, right? I loved talking to our neighbor across the street in a language that was unique to the state we grew up in. And I think even now I find that there are certain words that are just best said in a certain language. So I love the fact, I think being multilingual is such a rich experience. I think it allows you to think differently. It allows you to act differently. It allows you to relate to people differently. Um, I've tried to teach my children. I think it's a lot harder to do that. But they certainly know enough words that they know I'm talking about them. And so we try to have fun with it. But I think language is beautiful. I think multiple languages are even more special. And so I'm all for helping to retain that part of our heritage and culture.
Excellent. I agree fully with you about all the above. And talking about background, you talk a lot about the good girl habits that we learn as daughters. How much of that you had to unlearn in order to become the woman you are today?
It's interesting. I think I I believed, and I think this is sort of the upbringing and the beliefs that get fed to you, is if you obey, if you follow, if you stay small, good things will happen. And I think it took me a long time to realize, as I was getting more confident in my abilities, I think as I was entering more challenging workplace environments, I think I realized that I really wasn't interested in diminishing my light, right? I wanted to shine, I wanted to grow, I wanted to expand. And I think that conflict
Hmm.
is really what led me to ultimately unpack and leave the good girl image behind. And in many, I would say I had to redefine what good girl meant. And it wasn't about the chains, it wasn't about the obligations, it wasn't about my duty. It was just redefining what a good girl does with the life that she was trying to live. And I think I made peace with that. But you're completely right. It takes a lot of unlearning, great self awareness, but then actually working really hard to unpack that.
I love a lot of the redefinitions that you do in your book. I really highly recommend people check it out because one of them that you talk a lot about is calibrating. Can you please explain to people what it means?
Sure. And because I'm a business professional, because I have a finance background, I love to think of self improvement and self help in business terms. And so calibrating to me is really about, we do this in businesses all the time, right? We have performance metrics, we have key performance indicators. We know if you're doing well or you're not doing well, meeting expectations or not. And calibration is really, I'd say, it's a personal application of that rule and coming up with some very objective ways to understand, define, and hold yourself accountable to your life, your expectations, your relationships, and really, it's a way to ensure that you are really living the life you intend to live.
Mhm. And in your case, your career involves like high level corporate jobs, mentorship. Now you're an author. Please tell our audience what were the turning points that you felt you had to move from one to the next, be it just advancing in corporate or starting these parallel activities?
Sure. So I think I'll talk about my corporate experience and then we'll talk about the 2025 journey. I'd say in my corporate experience, I think the common pattern in my career was really around I was attracted to problems that people had been unable to solve or companies had been unable to solve. And I enjoyed the challenge of figuring something out that someone had said couldn't be done. How you execute on that, right? It's about building teams, it's about having the right strategy in place, it's about flawlessly executing. That was really the pattern in my corporate life, which served me very well. And every time I felt right, if I was being diminished, if I was losing control of my ability to earn my income and expand my potential, that was typically a trigger to say, I need to now look, right? Whether it's elsewhere, et cetera, or I need to be around the right people who can help me continue on this journey. And that is really what I would say allowed me to start at American Express here in New York, work in a bunch of different tech companies. And then I ended up in the C-suite running a very large organization. But it was a really fun role. It gave me enough freedom to do the things I wanted to do, make the impact that I knew I could make. And then in April of this year, just as life would have it, I was working 18-hour days. We were working for a private equity company, believing that if I just worked harder, if I communicated better, if I found another hour in my day, I could turn this ship around. And we were presented with a rather very difficult personal situation where my husband was diagnosed with cancer. And for him to be eligible for the treatment he needed, we had to relocate to New York. And he needed a full-time caregiver, or the alternative would have been 20 weeks in a hospital. So overnight, what I had defined as my identity as a professional, as a C-suite leader, as sort of this hard charging female, stopped completely. Like it sort of, you hit the wall. And I became a caregiver, a full-time caregiver, starting in April of this year. And that's the journey that really has led me on this path of becoming, remembering, finding the fire I used to have. And I'm learning to, I think, find my voice. But it's really more about, I've realized people don't find your voice, you unbury it, right? So people often bury their voices. And I'm really going through this journey now of finding my voice, and deciding what the next chapter of my life looks like, whether it's helping people transform, whether it's helping reinvent companies. And so, yeah, it's terrifying because the future is quite unknown, but it's exciting at the same time.
Thanks for sharing this. And women in general, they normally seem to have even more difficulty conciliating personal life with the professional life, be it for children or other reasons. So when there is something as severe as you just shared, then it really requires tough choices like you had to make. And I'm sure you have a very special mind. I have been seeing that in your book, things that other women consider in other interviews here and in other books that we read. They say, oh, when I hit that kind of situation, that's my zone of discomfort, right? Let's call this way. So it was very interesting for me when you started talking about it that you said, I wanted to resolve problems that nobody could. I loved the challenge. And in general, the impression people have is that this is a male characteristic. And you are now also a coach. Do you have the feeling, in my experience, it comes to us either in the show or even in contact in training, women that say what you did, they are normally from finance. And then once somebody even said, it's because we are used to resolve problems, math problems. So we just transfer them to life. Do you think it makes sense since I'm not an expert in the subject and you are?
I think it does. I think women are problem solvers. I think women are incredibly creative. and this is not, I'm not anti-men. I think women have a unique ability of working with others. And I personally am done apologizing for the softness that I bring, because I realize that that is really true strength. And the only way to go forward, right, is to tap into that. And so my wish for a lot of women that I work with is, don't hide your softness. There's nothing to be ashamed of. You are not weak because of that. But what is important is, how do you leverage that very strategically into a strength?
So, for our global audience, Sona Jepsen has a guest page on our website with information about her and her marvelous book, which I just read and highly recommend. So, please check it out. Another thing about women and men, obviously I agree with you. There is no need to differentiate in the sense of who is better, who is a greater achiever. I think everybody should collaborate and try to do it together. But there are some notions. So, in your opinion, women normally try to please more, or at least are perceived as bigger pleasers than men in other aspects of their lives, and sometimes they bring that to the corporate world. They don't want to say no, they want to accumulate function, then they get overwhelmed. Can you tell a story from your book that captures the moment in your own life that you chose your truth over approval? Because we do that for approval, right, most of the time, to being the nice girl in a certain way.
We do. And I think it's hard because there's a price to pay. I think that's one of the things I will tell women, right? I think it's great. We may think our comfort zone is safe, but it's a place to hide, is what I call it, right? So there's a high degree of self-awareness, I think accountability, before you can start some of the more difficult work. The story I'll talk about is at one of the companies I worked at, we had gotten to a place where the company had not been performing. And I was one of the leaders responsible for the change that was required. The challenge was, I worked with leaders who were very comfortable with the corporate narrative of why we were not growing as fast as we thought we needed to. And it really got to a point of making up a story, making up a truth about the numbers, the corporate performance, and actually sharing that with the board. That was probably, I would say, the most high stakes situation where I had to decide how I was going to show up and whether I was going to go and be the good girl, or actually take a stand, stick to my truth, and actually show up with data and facts to support my truth. And also an intuitive feeling about how people were feeling, right? The employee morale within the organization. That was, I would say, probably the riskiest situation from a corporate standpoint. It ended up, as it does, working out for me, where the honesty was actually appreciated and I was able to establish my presence. And so it does pay off, but it takes a lot of work and courage for you to feel the pain, that the only alternative is to show up and speak your truth.
Great. And on your book, you say something that I found also very interesting. Cases like you just described, people say, oh, that requires a lot of confidence. And on your book, you say women don't need confidence, they need more self-trust. Can you please explain the fundamental difference between the two and what's needed to build the so-called self-trust?
Sure. I love this because I spend a lot of time talking to people about this, because I think this is fundamental, right? I think it's not about, you don't become brave before you do something. Bravery is really taking that first step and acting like you are brave, right? So you may not know where the path leads, right? But showing up and taking the first step will illuminate the path ahead of you. You don't overcome fears by thinking about it. You have to move, you have to act, and you have to do something that creates momentum. And my work is really about defining what are the little things that I can do that almost rewire my nervous system to say, you're safe, we can keep going. But I would say clarity really comes after you've started the work. It doesn't come while you're sitting and thinking about it. And that to me is really the difference between confidence will come. Self-trust tells me I've done this before. I may not know the path. I can't see the path, but I'm going to trust myself to take the first step.
Sona, this is incredible. And is there any kind of tool in the book that you could share with our audience tonight?
Yes, I'd love to. There's a lot of gems packed in there, but the one I would like to share with everybody. So, whether you have read the book or not, I love talking about the energy audit. And I think we often talk about how we feel after a day at work, how we feel after a day spent with our family or children. An energy audit is a very simple exercise that really looks at your week and assesses the energy you have, right? So, what are the tasks? What are the events? What are the interactions that energized you, that added to your cup? And what are the things that happened that actually took from you and depleted your energy cup?
Fantastic.
A lot of professional women will spend weekends in self care, just catching up to everything that the week took away from them. And I think the energy audit is a really good exercise of just creating a little bit more self awareness about where you are and what you are doing and being more intentional and conscious about that.
You talk a lot small rituals. Do you think those should be daily rituals?
I have learned not to expect daily rituals because life has a strange way of getting in the way. I have learned to rely on rituals when I need them the most. And so that's the advice I will give your listeners is rituals are there to support you and guide you and not make you feel bad for missing them. So just know what works for you and you have it available when you need it.
And finally, for women who feel divided between their ambitions, their plans, and apparent opposite forces related to things like culture, expectations, if these women read your book, what message would you like them to take away? If they had to take one thing out of your book, what would be the most important that you think would be more impactful to change their lives?
Sure. I would say I have learned, and I think women who go through this will say this, that breaking cycles, right? If whether that is subservience, whether that is or finding your voice, I think breaking cycles is not rebellion. I would call it love for future generations. And so just think about what you are enduring and willing to do for future generations. And suddenly it makes it less about you and more about the impact you can have on your children, on your family, on your workplace. So that's the one piece of wisdom I'd like to leave your readers with.
One of so many. Sona Jepsen, your inspiring story and practical advice will definitely change lives around the globe. A lot of people are watching this, and it was really, really helpful. It was a pleasure to have you on our show.
Thanks, Liza. This was amazing.